Welcome back, everybody. We're a little bit late on Monday here, but we are still getting it done. I'm Joshua Doshi Howard, and today we're going to be talking about what happened in the guard meta in the tournament scene over this past weekend. As a quick reminder, a couple of things. One, for teams, we always check for 1600 ELO players or above based on their current stat check ELO at the time that they played the event. So that is what we look at for that. Otherwise, we're looking for people who get at least a 75% win rate. So this generally means 4-1 or better, or at 8-round events, it could be some 6-2s. We'll sometimes sneak in there as well. With that said, let's go ahead and take a look at what events happened this weekend. So to start off with the quick meta snapshot, we had a really good weekend. The best weekend we have had on the September data slate, and it's not that close. A lot of events. We had a fairly small weekend last week because it was the American Thanksgiving, meaning that a lot of players were not actually playing last week. Whereas this week, we are back up to pretty normal looking numbers, and a lot of very strong guard players were coming out. We end up having 112 wins, 103 losses, and 7 draws for an overall win rate of 52.0%. This is very high. This is really good. For the most part, we've been hovering around the mid to low 40s for a lot of the September data slate. So the fact that we have an overall 52% win rate this weekend is very good. A couple other things to note about this. One, the average ELO is the second highest average ELO of any week that we've had during this data slate. We only had one, which had an average ELO of 1556, but this is the highest median ELO we've had this entire time. Now, this doesn't mean it's not like a huge number. It's not like a huge gap between this and some of the other ones. However, it does mean that on average, we had a lot more good players, a lot more strong players playing this weekend, which does mean that the win rate does need to be taken with a little bit of a grain of salt. We didn't have a lot of what I kind of think of as the pantheon of a lot of top guard players, but we had a lot of people who are good guard players and people whose names I recognize actually playing the faction this weekend. One of the other big things to note is that we did have a lot of combined again. We've had a couple of weeks where people were not really playing combined, which I think most people would agree is, if not head and shoulders above the rest of the attachments, at least one of the ones that you always have to consider. Why am I not playing combined? We also only had 2 players with Leoin Winter Commanders. Good job, guys. Make sure you tell your friends to stop playing that data sheet. It needs buffs. It might be getting them sometime this week. However, it has not had them yet. We had no Grizzled Company players this weekend. Not a big surprise. We don't even have the official points. The best thing we have is what has been reported on Goonhammer, which is very likely to be accurate, but we don't know for sure. So we might start seeing some early adopters coming in this next week. I will have another video coming out in a couple of days, maybe tomorrow, probably the day after, talking with a couple of other top players about their thoughts, and we will get more of that information in the next couple of weeks to see how it actually is shaking out. Okay, with that, let's go ahead and start talking about the list. I believe I have 6, I think it's 6 singles lists and 3 teams lists for you guys today. Let's get into the first one. The first one that we had a couple of events over in Asia where we had a couple of GT winners. The first one, Gabriel Leung, coming in at the FA Cup, which was in Hong Kong, which I believe a lot of the Chinese events are played on WTC terrain. I don't know if that's also true of Hong Kong, but this looks like a WTC style list to me. It is a pretty normal looking Rogaldoran Commanders and 12 Bulgrin, which is very normal. You have the very similar tank package of Kazakh and transports, and then just a couple of other pieces. Let's go ahead and go through the whole thing. It's a Caden Castellan, 2 Caden Command Squads, 1 Ogrim Bodyguard, 2 Rogaldoran Commanders, 1 20-man Cadians, 1 10-man Cadians, 1 10-man Catachan, 2 Chimeras, 1 Torox, 2 units of 6 Bulgrin, and 3 units of Kazarkin. A lot of very standard stuff coming out overall in this list. Of course, you do have the 2 Rogaldoran Commanders, you have the 3 units of Kazarkin in transports, you have a 20 brick of Cadians. I'm assuming the normal loadout here is you have the Caden Castellan, Caden Command Squad, 20 Cadians. That is 1 brick, and then the other Caden Command Squad going with Ogrim Bodyguard. However, there is an option here to have the Ogrim Bodyguard joined to the really big unit. We'll be talking a little bit more about that. There's not a whole lot of new stuff going on in this list, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this one. It did end up being Eldar, Necrons, Ultramarines, Space Wolves, Thousand Suns, and ended up getting first out of I don't remember how many players. I think there's like 30-ish players going to this event. So congratulations to Gabriel. Not a player I'm very familiar with, and also playing a list that we have seen plenty of times before. So more proven lists having more success. Next, we have another list coming out from Zifan Zhu, who is one of the generally regarded as one of the best Chinese players of 40K, taking first place at the Shanghai GT, going 5-0. And we also have this great photo of him of this event where he dressed up as Lord Solar for the event, which was very fun. Anyway, at this event, he had a slightly different take on a guard list. There's a couple pieces here that are very normal, and then a couple pieces that are a little bit unusual, and we'll go ahead and talk about those in a moment. We have the Caden Castellan with a Caden Command Squad, a Catachan Command Squad, and an Ogrim Bodyguard, 2 Rogaldorn Commanders, 1 unit of 20 Cadians, 2 units of 10 Catachan, 2 Chimeras, 1 Taurox, 1 unit of 6 Bulgrin, 3 Kazarkin, a Leoin Vanquisher, and a Scout Sentinel. So a lot of the stuff here, like we just took a look at with Gabriel's army, still very similar. You still have the Caden Castellan unit with the Caden Command Squad and 20 Cadians. We are replacing the Caden Command Squad, the second Caden Command Squad, with the Catachan Command Squad, which does give you access to Assault, if being ever so slightly less durable. And what was the other? Oh, there's one other difference. I can't remember what the other difference is off the top of my head between the Catachan and the Cadian Squad. I think the Catachan Squad can take, the Catachan Squad can take more guns, because the Caden Command Squad Master Fox is a mandatory take, whereas in the Catachan Command Squad, I'm pretty sure you can replace the Master Fox with another gun. Overall, units are very similar, so more or less a style choice there coming in. 20 Cadians, there is one 10-man Cadians that was replaced by Catachan. So again, very similar between these two lists. The 2 Chimera, 1 Taurox, once again, very similar. And then our last couple of points is where the difference really comes in. We have the 1 unit of 6 Bulgrin. I've said a lot of times that I'm a big fan of the 12 or more, or not taking any, but Zifan coming in once again with a slightly different take, but only taking the 6 Bulgrin, and then replacing a lot of that with the Leoin Vanquisher and the Scout Sentinel. Pretty much a 1-for-1. Like, if you just took like these two lists, they are very, very nearly identical. That'll be a bit of a theme this weekend. But the second unit of Bulgrin replaced by a Leoin Vanquisher and a Scout Sentinel. So this will give you a little bit more power from your Rogaldorn commanders, because they will just point at something with reroll 1s from the for the entire activation. Whereas the Vanquisher, it can kind of serve as like a different version of Bulgrin, because you can just throw it up into the midboard, tank up a lot of like melee, because it is still toughness 11 with a 2-up save. A lot of armies and a lot of units are just going to bounce off of it. So overall, a pretty similar style of list coming out from Zifan coming in at the Shanghai GT. I'm also told that this was the first 5-round GT in China for all of 10th edition. So that's very exciting. Hopefully we'll be getting more events from China that actually hit that 5-round marker that is not only needed to get their results entered in ELO, so we will have a better stat check understanding of the Chinese players, but it also does mean that we get to see a little bit more of what's going on in the region. Zifan ended up beating World Leaders, Sisters, Admech, World Leaders again, and then Necrons to get first place at the Shanghai GT. Congratulations to Zifan, and he also recently joined the Discord, so if you want to ask him more about it, great place to do it. Next, we have a fairly regular contributor. I believe this is the second or third time. I think it was like 2 teams events that we've talked about Philip Koenig and his combined arms, but this is a pretty similar list to what we've seen him play in the past. It's a Caden Command Squad, a Catachan Command Squad, a Tempestus Command Squad, 2 Ogrim Bodyguards, 2 Rogaldorn Commanders, 1 unit of 20 Cadians, 1 unit of 10 Cadians, 1 unit of 10 Catachan, 1 Chimera, 1 Taurox, 1 Hellhound, 1 Scout Sentinel, 3 units of Kazarkin, 1 unit of 5 Ratlings, Aquilons, and 1 unit of 5 Scions. Now, Philip, I've definitely seen play bricks of 10 Scions in the past, going down to a unit of 5 Scions plus the Tempestus Command Squad. Also opting for a Catachan Command Squad here, just like we saw with Zifan in our last list. But otherwise, this is just mostly a pile of good things. The one thing that kind of jumps out to me is that the Caden Command Squad here doesn't have either a Castellan or Ursula Creed to get that extra little bit of value. But one of the other big things is you don't need you don't need like quite as many orders because there's not units that need the orders, right? You only have the 20 Cadian unit that really, really needs orders on most turns that is going to be active. Whereas if you had like a 20 brick of Deathcore of Krieg, you would often want that. You would often want that order as well for that kind of unit. However, this doesn't have a lot of units that need orders other than squadron orders, where the Rogal Dorn Commanders definitely fills that out. The other big interesting thing here is the decision to only take 2 transports. It's very often that you see 3 transports, either 3 Chimeras or 2 Chimeras and a Taurox being the most common that you tend to see. But otherwise, it's still a lot of good units being played in guard, and it ends up doing quite well. We had Philip. Because he got a draw in round 1 against Tyranids, he did end up having a couple of pair downs. I think it's like half the time he paired down, half the time he paired up with the draw. So because he got a draw against Tyranids, a win against Emperor's Children, Deathwatch, Drukhari, and then Ultramarines in the last round. And going 4 wins and 1 draw to get 3rd place overall. Ooh, I did not put the right name. I forgot to change the name. So sorry, Philip, whatever event this was at. It was, Leoin Winter Singles. Leoin Winter Singles was the correct name for this event. So congratulations to Philip on getting this 3rd place. Next, we have a very interesting take, something very different coming out from Vladimir Dudkovich at DicePod GT over in Moscow, Russia, getting a win with Recon Element, something that we have seen a couple of times before. We don't often see, or we have not seen a lot of people like taking Recon to like really big heights. We've seen it's mostly been like Wesley St. Hines, and there was like a smattering of other people trying it for a little while. But ever since then, it's mostly just kind of calmed down, and even good players have mostly been going like 3. We've seen like more 3-2s from good players playing Recon from players that I have not seen play Recon in the past. But Vladimir going in with a 5-0 overall. Winning the event DicePod GT, like we said, in Moscow, Russia. It is Gon's Ghost, Sly Marbo, 3 Cadian Castellans, 3 Cadian Command Squads, Nork Deadog, 3 units of 20 Cadians, 3 units of 10 Deathcore of Krieg, 2 units of 10 Rough Riders, 1 unit of 5 Rough Riders, 2 units of Kazarkin, 1 unit of Aquilons, 3 units of Krieg Flamers, and a Cyclops. Now, this is a very different take on Recon Element than what we've seen a lot of other players play in the past, whereas Wesley St. Hines, aka Nemo the Fish, has played like 230-ish bodies, I think is the number of bodies he actually plays in most of his Recon Element lists. Vladimir going down with far fewer bodies. So a lot of Nemo's lists will have 4 by 20 Cadians, and then Ursula Creed with one of them, and then a Castellan leading an extra one, and then he has like 70 Krieg, 60 to 70 Krieg most of the time, and then this has been replaced pretty heavily by 2 units of Kazarkin, 1 unit of Aquilons, and then 3 units of Krieg Flamers. And the big thing here about this list is it does, like, it's a lot less durable on average, simply because the Kazarkin and Aquilons, yes, they always get the Recon Element with the cover, however, they basically have the same save as all of the Cadians and all of the Deathcore of Krieg, because if you can give the regular guys take cover, Kazarkin and Aquilons do not have better saves than like the Krieg or the Cadians, and then they have half the number of bodies. So you're really relying on the higher density and slightly better self-sufficiency here of the Kazarkin and the Aquilons, which is a major reason why that you tend not to see these units nearly as often, or rather why Nemo has not oftentimes gone with like Kazarkin or Aquilons in the past. And then the Krieg Flamers, while they do have some good tools to deal with like marine bodies and creating overwatch threats around the board, one of the other big things that you tend to notice about Recon Element is that because the Cadian Castellans give the sustained order out, you have really good overwatch anyway in the units, because you just have a really high volume of sustained hits fire. So it is a couple of different choices coming through. The extra 5 Rough Riders creating a little bit of extra aggression there. But if we take a look at the win path that Vladimir had going into Death Guard, Custodes, Votan, World Leaders, and Death Guard again, the biggest thing that I look at here that is going to be a bit more difficult to deal with than the other ones is the World Leaders matchup, because they tend to have a lot of things. They tend to have a bunch of things that you do want to try and make sure you don't get tagged by world leaders when they charge in. So it's a lot harder to just be like, hey, that one brick, like your one brick of wardens, that doesn't get to hit. Whereas in world leaders, you're like, well, I have like 4 or 5 things that I really don't want to be impacting my lines all at the same time. So that is probably the most difficult one. Death Guard and Death Guard in particular has historically been a very, very good matchup for Recon. So I'm really curious to see what it is that Vladimir would try and do, or like would change with this information. I do think, like, as I look at this one, the most interesting unit that has been included here that we don't often see in other recon lists is the unit of Aquilons, that does have access to like getting to some places that the rest of your army doesn't, simply because it does have access to that 6-inch deep strike. However, a lot of these places can be gotten to with good rapid ingresses, and it does create a lot of like pressure in terms of like where your Rough Riders are going to be going. You should end up having like 3, maybe 4 turns of rapid ingress threats, depending on whether you're going first or second and how aggressively you're using your Rough Riders. Anyway, congratulations to Vladimir Dudkovich, a player that I don't believe I've seen their name pop up before, taking down the GT over in Russia. Next, we have a fairly regular contributor, someone who shows up reasonably often in, I don't know if he's been showing up so much in these videos, but he's been showing up in the spreadsheets for a long time. We have Duncan Blum going 4-1 at the Witch Trials. And it's a style of list that has gotten a little bit less popular, especially in the September slate. It was very popular in the June slate, where you would take a lot more tanks because we had a little bit more trash, we had a little bit more midboard anyway. But as we've lost points between the June slate and the September slate, a lot of people have been shifting more towards midboard and tanks, where this one is definitely leaning towards the tanks and midboard. It is a more violent list than a lot of the other styles of list that people have been tending to play. It is 1 Cadian Command Squad, 2 Rogaldorn Commanders, Ursula Creed, 1 Engine Seer, 1 unit of 10 Cadians, 1 unit of 10 Catachan, 1 Chimera, 1 Taurox, 1 unit of 5 Death Riders, 2 units of Khazarkin, 1 unit of Creek Flamers, 2 Leoin Winter Battle Tanks, a Leoin Winter Exterminator, and a Scout Sentinel. So where a lot of the other lists that we've been seeing for combined, where they have like midboard and tanks, we're often seeing like 2 Rogaldorn Commanders and then maybe 1 other Leoin Russ of some variant. This has the 2 Rogaldorn Commanders and 3 Leoin Russ variants coming in. So it does have a lot of long-range shooting. It will have a little bit more ability to play on more open boards. So this, partly because I believe Duncan's American, but also just like looking at this list, this screams it's being played on Games Workshop terrain as opposed to WTC. Does have Ursula Creed in here, which we have been seeing a little bit less of since a lot of people have been shifting over towards Castellans quite a bit. But it does give you a lot more freedom with your command point expenditure throughout the course of the game. One of the major things that I always see, or that I always get a little bit of pause about when I look at combined arms lists, is only 2 units of Khazarkin coming through. This is a unit that is one of the most skill-expressive units in the entirety of the Guard Codex, and I would argue one of the most skill-expressive units in the entire game, how you're using your Khazarkin. And what that generally means is you tend to see them taken a ton by good players because, if you're good, you can express that skill with the Khazarkin. And seeing only 2 units of Khazarkin here does mean that there's not quite as much flexibility in Duncan's list as a lot of other similar styles of list. Having the 2 Khazarkin in transports does mean that you don't have the same kind of ability to just project force out on the board, and you are more reliant on using your Leoin Winter Battle Tanks and the Exterminators and the Rogaldorn Commanders as your second and third wave a little bit faster than a lot of other similar lists. Duncan ended up going and beating CSM, Chaos Knights, Sisters, Ultramarines, and then losing to Gene Soda Cults in the last round, going 4-1, not getting a top 3 placement, but still a very good placement nonetheless. So good job to Duncan. I'm sure we'll see you again soon. All right, next we have 2 nearly identical lists that are going to be coming up. First one by David Purcell at Victor's 50th Crusade, getting first place overall with a 5-0 result. He had 2 Cadian Castellans, 2 Cadian Command Squads, 2 Ogren Bodyguards, 2 Rogaldorn Commanders, 2 units of 20 Cadians, 1 unit of 10 Catachan, 3 units of Khazarkin, 2 units of 10 Rough Riders, and then 3 Chimeras. This is pretty much a carbon copy of the Gustavo Recombined that Gustavo was piloting for a little while and has really been pioneering pretty heavily. And this is David's small changes. Biggest changes for this is, of course, the 2 units of 10 Rough Riders that are very cost effective at dealing with Victrix. And having those Rough Riders on the board does make your opponent at least respect reactive moving towards you, because the classic issue, of course, is if you move within 9 of Victrix, they can either reactive away from you to try and make your charges harder, or they can reactive towards you because they also have access to Blood Surge. So if they reactive towards you, they're going to make the Rough Riders charge easier. So having the Rough Riders in the list does mean that you get a little bit more freedom with how you're moving around, and also your opponent has to respect the Rough Riders, because Rough Riders at 120 points trade pretty consistently, and by consistently I mean like fairly inconsistently, because they could trade way up or they can trade down, but the average does mean that they trade for about equal points worth of Victrix Guard, which is something that is not the easiest thing in the world to do in the current metagame. Yeah, I mean, this is the good stuff. The Cadian Castellans, the Cadian Command Squads, and the 20 Cadians do put out a lot of plasma and a lot of lasgun shots, so they will be doing damage into just about anything, but they are actually very, very efficient in taking down normal marine bodies. T4, 3-up save, 2-wound bodies, you're putting out enough plasma that you should be killing most of the unit every time you activate them. You have the Royal Goldorn Commanders, you have the Kazarkin full of Chimeras. David Purcell going through, he did tell me a funny story about how he overwatched a Doomsday Arc to death with just the Oppressor Cannon from a Royal Goldorn Commander, because he rolled 5 lethal hits with the Oppressor Cannon. The Doomsday Arc failed every save, and that's how he was able to get his win in Necrons in the finals. Or maybe not the only reason, but was one of the things that happened in the game to find that win. Congratulations, David Purcell has not been nearly as active recently for personal reasons, but is starting to come back into the game a little bit more. So we'll see how that ends up going. Next, a nearly identical list played by me. Yes, me at Mary Slaaneshmas. So if you take a look, I'm going to go back and forth and back and forth. And there's exactly 1 unit of difference, or like 1 unit was taken out of David's list, and those points are spent on other things in my list. Okay, it's 2 Cadian Castellans, 2 Cadian Command Squads, 2 Ogren Bodyguards, 2 Royal Goldorn Commanders, 2 units of 20 Cadians. David had 1 unit of 10 Catachan. I have 2 units of 10 Catachan. We both had 3 units of Kazarkin. David had 2 units of 10 Rough Riders. I had 1 unit of 10 Rough Riders. We both had 3 Chimeras, and then I had a Scout Sentinel. So David spent 120 points on 10 Rough Riders. I spent those same 120 points on 10 Catachan and a Scout Sentinel. I don't really have a ton different to say about this. I don't have quite the same ability to just like deal with Victrix guards with my melee. However, I do have a little bit of extra trash. One of the big things here is, of course, the Rough Riders have a stronger rapid ingress threat. You have at least 2 turns of potential rapid ingress threats between the Cadian Castellan brick and the Rough Riders in David's list, or you could have up to 3, whereas the list that I was bringing only really has 2, but oftentimes only 1 turn of genuine rapid ingress threat between the 10 Rough Riders, and I was oftentimes starting the Cadian Castellan brick on the board, or like both Cadian Castellan bricks on the board, which is always something that you do have to decide from game to game. Do you want both Castellan bricks on the board, or do you want one of them in reserve? The Scout Sentinel in my army does mean that the Royal Goldorn Commanders will have those 1 individual, like, better activations into things that they're shooting at, because they will be just re-rolling all ones to hit. So you don't need to expend as many of your commander re-rolls relatively early on. David ended up going 5-0. I ended up going 5-1 and getting 3rd place because I ended up losing in the last round going up against Sisters, which was a very close game anyway. I will have more to talk about that in a video. It might come out tomorrow, maybe Wednesday. We'll figure out exactly how it is. I've got a couple other videos that I'm going to be doing in the next couple of days. But more information will be coming out about that soon. Next, we have Caleb Smith, a player who has showed up a couple of times, has been doing pretty well with guard recently, won the Laughing Dragon. I think he got first place at Laughing Dragon, and then he also showed up in a teams event that I was also at as well. Caleb going 4-1 at the same event that I did, Mary Slaaneshmas. And this is almost exactly a list that I've played before, very similar to the one that I took to. What did I take this to? That I took to Mugu Games like 2 weeks ago, something like that. Maybe 3 weeks ago, maybe last week. Jeez, time's getting weird. Anyway, Caleb has Gaunt's Ghost, Sly Marbo, Ursula Creed, 1 Cadian Command Squad, 2 Rogaldorn Commanders, 1 unit of 10 Cadians, 1 unit of 10 Catachan, 1 unit of 20 Krieg, 3 units of Kazarkin, a Leoin Battle Tank, 2 Scout Sentinels, 2 Chimeras, and a Taurox. So this is very similar to what I took to Mugu. Differences from that list to this one are I didn't have the Catachan when I was playing. I had a unit of 20 Cadians instead. I had 3 Chimeras, whereas Caleb has turned 1 Chimera into a Taurox, and I had a Leoin Exterminator, whereas Caleb has the Leoin Battle Tank for the rerolls. So very, very small adjustments, very similar list to one that I played not that long ago. This one does have, what's the difference? Like the extra unit of Catachan, I think, is the biggest difference in terms of like unit count that we had between these two lists, but otherwise it's still just it's a very violent list. It does everything pretty well. Having Sly Marbo is an interesting shout always, because one of the idiosyncrasies of the event that this was played at was that we did not know what board we were playing on until pairings were done, because there was layouts 1, 6, and 8, and on 1 and 6 your objectives tend to be pretty exposed, so having that one little loan up can be a pretty good, can be very helpful there, whereas on layout 8, Sly Marbo is not quite as useful because your objective is very protected pretty much all the time. Anyway, Caleb ended up going 4-1, losing to, I think it was Big Demons. I think it was Demonic Incursion being played by one of the Team USA guys. So anyway, good result from Caleb, getting a GT win not that long ago and getting a 4-1 to back it up a couple of weeks later. So well done to Caleb. Next, we're going to start going into the teams events from this weekend. This is one of the most interesting lists that we do have for the weekend, being piloted by Edoardo Rinaldi, one of the consistently top guard performing players in Italy. And this is a mechanized assault list that he ended up playing, and it's a very unusual mechanized assault list. We'll talk about it after we get through the list. We have Gaunt's Ghost, a Rogaldorn Commander, 1 unit of 10 Catachan, 2 Chimeras, 2 Tauroxes, 1 unit of 10 Rough Riders, 1 unit of 5 Rough Riders, 1 unit of 6 Bulgrin, 3 units of Kazarkin, 3 units of Ogrin, 1 unit of 10 Ratlings, and a Rogaldorn Battle Tank. So this bears some superficial similarities to the one that John Winter Russell was playing for a while, where John Winter Russell and the one that I was trying as well had 1 Chimera, 2 Tauroxes, and a Taurox Prime. This replaces the Taurox Prime with a second Chimera and has absolutely no Scions, which have been very popular by players like John Winter Russell and Robert Moreland, who have also been playing Mechanized Assault on and off. It does have the 2 Rogaldorns, one of them being a commander, one of them being the battle tank, and I think this is mostly a cost-saving measure for the Rogaldorn versus the Rogaldorn battle tank, saving those 25 points in order to get an extra unit somewhere is going to be my biggest thing. The other really big thing about this list that I find surprising is the 1 unit of 6 Bulgrin. I know because it is being played on WTC terrain, the 6 Bulgrin do end up having a lot of play simply because they will always have somewhere to stage. The distances that you need to charge on WTC terrain is a lot less, and also you can't get 1-inched off the wall on WTC terrain. But the Kazarkin, the Ogrin, and the Ratlings do give you a lot of tools. You have a little bit of everything in this army. I'm not going to lie to you guys, as I take a look at this army, the big thing for me is I feel like this is probably just better in combined. So I'd be really, really curious to talk to Eduardo at some point and also just pick his brain, because I know even at WCW, I believe he had his list title was I'm too afraid to run mechanized assault. So I'm curious what the switch was from WCW to now, where we've been on the same patch, that makes him willing to shift over to mechanized assault for this, because it feels like a lot of the very standard things that we used to do quite a bit, like you use the Kazurkin or something like Katachan to scout your transports forward, and then the Kazurkin would hop out of the transport, and then you would load a unit of 3 Ogren in afterwards. You can do a similar thing with the 10 Ratlings. You could do the same thing with the Katachan as the first wave. There's a lot of waves of stuff that are going to be coming out of this army. And with the +1 to wound, it does mean that some of them do have the ability to punch up. The Ogren units in particular, really liking the clear and secure full hit and wound rerolls against targets on objective, does allow them to punch up much heavier into things that they might not otherwise. But it is otherwise it's a grab bag. There's a lot of different pieces coming out of this army in order to play on all different parts of the board. It was a pretty good run coming out from Eduardo. He ended up playing into guard twice this weekend. One time getting a 17-3 into combined, and then also getting an 18-2 into combined, which is very impressive to me. Partly because my experience is that, having played the matchup mostly on the combined side, I find this matchup very difficult to lose with combined arms, whereas Eduardo getting 2 not just wins into combined arms guard, but also pretty big wins at that, 17 and an 18. He also got a 12-8 into Death Guard, a 15-5 into Votan, and an 8-12 being the one loss into Sisters. The Votan also a pretty impressive win, simply because my experience has oftentimes been an inability to deal with the 2-up save transports that the Votan were bringing. So really good stuff coming out from Eduardo, finding some ways to beat matchups that I think are pretty hard, and not just beat them, but come out with relatively big wins. So really good stuff coming out from Eduardo. Next, we have another repeat player coming in, Reese Darville, coming in from the UK, playing it was a 4-man teams event for this one, so not as many players, a kind of unusual sizing. You tend to see a lot of 5s and 8s, but I believe the team was like Eldar, Admech, Sisters, and then Guard, which are 3 very obviously top armies, and then Guard kind of being a bit of a surprise coming out from Reese. It is Cadian Command Squad, Gunskos, 2 Rogaldorn Commanders, Ursula Creed, 1 unit of 10 Cadians, 3 units of 10 Katachan, 1 Chimera, 2 Toroxes, 2 units of 5 Rough Riders, 1 unit of 6 Bulgrin, 3 units of Kazurkin, and 1 Scout Sentinel. Now the 3 units of 10 Katachan make me think that this was being played on UKTC. As someone who does not play on UKTC and probably never really will, the Katachan, from what I understand, are way more effective on those boards than they tend to be on Games Workshop boards. And they're also okay. They're decent on the WTC boards as well, but because I know so much of the UKTC terrain formats do utilize those super L's in the middle of the board, the Bulgrin, the Katachan end up becoming very, very valuable. Reese end up looking, based on the pairings that he ended up getting, made me think that this was a bit of a hunter list, or one of the things that you would just first defend, and just make sure that you can always get a good board choice, because he ended up getting a lot of pretty big wins, and they were all into different variations of Marines. He got a 20-0 into Ultramarines, 2 15-5s into Emperor's Children, an 18-2 into Ultramarines, and then a 20-0 into Dark Angels. I'm not sure exactly what the terrain format was for this event. However, it was very obvious that Reese's team was looking in order to try and get a bunch of really big wins into different variations of Marines. Guard has always been very good at killing Marine bodies in general. I am a little bit impressed that he was able to get a 20 and an 18 into Ultramarines. I don't know if they were playing with the Victrix or not, but I have to imagine they probably were. And making sure that you can get a lot of really big, probably primary advantages going up against those armies. So good stuff overall to Reese. I know that he was playing Knights well before, but 2 back-to-back very strong performances with the Astra Militarum in teams circumstances obviously shows quite a bit of versatility in his ability to play. Okay, our last list that I'm going to show you, they popped in last time and said that I pronounced their name correctly. Unfortunately, Noah, I don't remember if it was Bellew or Bellew, but I think it was Bellew. I think that's the one I went with last time. And I was told that I pronounce it correctly, so hopefully I did so again this time. Noah not having quite as strong of a weekend in terms of actual performance as a couple of the other players that we've had with teams this weekend. However, of course, with the big reason why we do the 1600 cutoff is not so much about the results, but more just what are good players willing to take for guard in teams environments. And so Noah getting a 3-2 this weekend in this teams environment. Oh, I got I forgot to change the name of the event again. I'm sorry, Noah. I don't remember what event name this was called. It was 2 Rogaldorn Commanders, a unit of 10 Cadians, 1 Chimera, 1 Torox, 1 unit of 6 Bulgrin, 1 unit of Krieg Flamers, 3 Ogren, 1 unit of 5 Rattlings, 1 unit of Aquilons, and then an Exterminator, 2 Vanquishers, and 2 Scout Sentinels. This, to me, screams that it is probably a first defender list. Mostly because it has 2 Rogaldorn Commanders, 2 Vanquishers, and Exterminator. This is going to outshoot all but the most heavy shooting armies, which means that you are going to try and take this on probably a lot of really open boards. I believe Noah is in the eastern half of the United States, which generally tends to play on Games Workshop terrain. I don't know if this was played under NTL style pairings or the WTC style pairings in terms of whether or not the defender will pick a board, but the attacker on NTL style pairings will get to pick a mission between one of 2 choices, which depends on what board you're playing on. But this definitely looks like the kind of thing that would love to be playing on open boards. You're going to be able to outshoot most people, and then you kind of have a bunch of tools in order to solve different problems, right? You have the 6 Bulgrin, you have the Flamers, you have the Ogren, you have the Rattlings, you have the Quillons that each kind of do their thing. And one of the big things about this kind of list and why when people look at these lists and ask me hey, should I try and play this list? My general response is usually no. I don't think most players should try to play this style of list because when you have one tool that does one job, you have to make sure that tool does that job or it's not good. And that's really what I look at with this. So this is definitely one of the armies that you will need to make sure you have your board choice. In general, you will also need to make sure that you're actually relatively reactive to how your opponent is going to be playing on the board, how your opponent is going to be doing their deployment. As it doesn't have the same kind of flexibility. You don't have the Kazarkin, which just kind of do everything okay, right? Like the Flamers, you can throw Kazarkin out and they can go kill a Rhino, whereas if you try and do the same thing with the Krieg Flamers, it's just not going to happen, right? The Krieg Flamers are not going to do that job. So you have all these little tools in order to create a lot of pressure on the board if they are used correctly. The one big thing I'd be really curious about is what the plan is with this army to actually hold the natural. You have the 10 Cadians who can stick your home and then move forward after that, or they could be used to screen, but the 6 Bulgrin are maybe the thing that are going to be trying to stand on your natural relatively early in the game. This is what a lot of top players have been opting for, different kinds of 20 bricks, whether it be 20 Death Core of Krieg or 20 man Cadian unit, but there's none of those in this unit, and so you can do that with the Lemur's Vanquisher relatively early on. You can try and do it with the Exterminator. The 6 Bulgrin tend to prefer to play in the middle because they don't move very quickly, and if you just have Bulgrin on your natural, your opponent can just ignore them to some degree, but if they ignore them, then they also aren't trying to take your primary away. So it's always a bit of a mixed bag. Anyway, Noah ended up having a 14-6 into Chaos Space Marines, an 8-12 into Tau, an 8-12 into Thousand Suns, a 15-5 into Death Guard, and then a 12-8 into Tyranids. With the idea that you're trying to play on relatively open boards, the 8-12 into Tau makes a fair amount of sense to me, but I am really curious about what happens in the T-Suns matchup in particular. So Noah, if you are watching this, go ahead and let us know what was standing on your primary, and then what was the Thousand Suns matchup like, because that one can be very volatile depending on what Magnus does, and I believe it was Rubrique failings as well. Also, before I sign out for the day, Bryce, who had he started 4-1, and then I think he lost his last round, but he wanted a quick shout out in the video. So shout out to Bryce at some event in the Midwest. I know it was a 6-rounder. Anyway, shout out Bryce. Everybody else, though, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the meta update for Guard. I do have a couple of other videos coming out in the near future. I just went to GT this last weekend, so I've not had a ton of time to look at Grizzle Company myself. However, I will have a panel of experts I will be talking to. So that video will be coming out either tomorrow evening, US West time, US Pacific time, or sometime on Wednesday. And then I also need to do a recording for the GT that I was at this last weekend in order to talk about some of the things that I learned, some of the things that I think are really teachable moments for you guys. And we will have that out sometime later this week as well. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we'll see you guys all next time. Bye bye.